Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
Welcome to Flat Earth Debate Live. I'm your host Nathan Oakley, and if you are new to this channel, or you've not done so already, how dare you, then be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification icon to keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. If you'd like to support this channel, there is a super chat that runs alongside each of these shows while they are live. There's also a PayPal, Patreon and crypto link in the info box below the video. Most importantly, if you'd like to join the discussion, simply mute the page you are currently watching, then click the link in the info box below this video to join the panel and express your views on the nature of Earth. If you do join, please don't swear. If you do, you'll be ejected, and if you are, please don't try to rejoin the stream using stock accounts. You'll be warmly welcome back on the next stream. Please also share the show on social media. Sharing the show obviously increases the live audience, but this in turn increases the chances of a more diverse panel, so please share the show. And one last time, if you are new to the channel or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification icon to keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. Now, we are joined by 10th Man, Sleeping Warrior, Flatzoid, and Brian. I believe that's it in G+. Very good to have you all.
Hey.
Hey.
Good afternoon. Hello.
Hello. And we've also got a whole bunch of people in Discord as well. Hello, good morning or afternoon, wherever you may be in Discord. Good to have you.
Hello from Discord.
Hello.
My God, there's somebody there.
There's always someone there, whether or not they'll reply. Any signs of Earth curvature?
Not from Redondo Beach.
Not from Discord.
Someone say not from Discord.
Fancy giving, as we've been discussing it in the pre-show, I know the live audience won't be aware of this, but we've been discussing housekeeping in a little bit more detail, potentially because myself, Sleeping Warrior, Quantum Eraser, and any other ballbusters that want to join us are going to be doing some individual shows, potentially over this coming week, depending on if I can actually arrange it, because it's probably looking like it's going to be me actually producing them. So that's fine. I'll produce them, but I've just got to tie down QE and Sleeping Warrior. But like I said, that's spurred into a conversation of us discussing the finer details of some of the housekeeping questions. So as we've only just started, I know housekeeping's supposed to be quick, get it done with, move on. Do you want to actually talk about some of the questions in a little bit more detail, at least give the debunk for each question before we move on? If not, we'll just rattle through them.
Are you talking about doing like a flat earth clues of the housekeeping?
I suppose you could look at it in that way. They're not really clues, more absolute pummelings of the heliocentric religion rather than clues, but yeah.
Yeah, they're not clues, but yeah, I just meant in that way, like kind of it's just a series. That's a good idea.
I mean, yeah, we'll definitely do that, but did you want to carry on in the vein that we were in the pre-show or not?
Yeah, I'm easy.
Oh, go on, somebody.
I see the housekeeping questions as they're asked, but I also see it from, say, a step back view as a whole. And as a whole, basically all of them are saying question everything. And if you're going to say science, then stick to the scientific method. And by the way, here's the scientific method. And then when you look at the housekeeping questions, how many of those things fall under the natural world and the scientific method could be used? If you can't vary the independent variable, it falls out of the scientific method. So how did they get these statements if it's not science and there's no hypothesis?
They didn't.
Correct. Hey, Arwen.
Hello.
Hey, Arwen.
Okay. Hey, Arwen. So the assertion of Earth curve, albeit as discussed in the pre-show with Neil deGrasse Tyson asserting that you've got to get 100,000+ feet in the air to see any curvature, we are still at ground level here in the trenches of Flat Earth debate, arguing with people who believe that when you apply the formulas of a begging the question proof of nothing perspective hijacking curve calculator, you can describe the effects of obstruction at the horizon, I'll use their terminology, as Earth curve, i.e. it's being obstructed by Earth's curvature. Now in reality this is merely a hijacking of the effect of perspective. So an item getting smaller as it goes away from you is ignored in these mathematics. A 10-foot wall is a 10-foot wall at a mile, or 10 miles in their mathematics. It can also be a 10-foot wall at 10 million miles, and when drawn side profile, orthographic view, lovingly referred to as Muppet vision, because you see the side of your own head, then you can have a 10-foot wall at 1 million miles. You just draw a line between the two and write 1 million on it, and say that the scale is such that you should see it at 1 million miles away. Now that's because they're using 10 feet. 10 feet won't change at distance. What actually is happening is the item's getting smaller. The angular size reduces with distance until it disappears. That's why things disappear in the distance perspective. But that effect has been hijacked and called Earth curve, which it's not. So the response to any signs of Earth curve is typically going to be met with, why are you utilising a begging the question? Because it assumes the R value already, assuming the outcome in the response. Begging the question, proof of nothing, perspective hijacking curve calculator, to assert something which we see as an arbitrary position called the horizon is actually the reified edge of your Earth curve. So there is no response to any signs of Earth curve beyond the use of a perspective hijacking curve calculator which assumes its outcome. Anything anyone else wants to add in regards to Earth curve and the housekeeping question thereof?
Yeah. Is that 10 man or flat side? I was just going to say that the whole thing about Neil deGrasse Tyson and his 120,000 feet, you can't see Earth curve from 120,000 feet. He only said that. Because he knows we're never going to see it. Like we should see it. We should see it from a high building. You know, if the maths are, if you look at the maths correctly, we should see it from basically a high building. Or nowhere. We should never have to go anywhere like up as far as the 35-foot high. 35,000 feet high in a plane to see it or anything else. We should be able to see it. It should be all around. It should be evident. Evident that it's there, but it's not. He knows we'll never see it. So he said 120,000 feet because he knows no one's going to be going up to 120,000 feet. The only people that go up there are NASA. You know, and other than that, all they have is looming. And I've been looking at looming, and it actually disproves what they're trying to prove with it. If looming is what the mainstream say looming is, from what I've been looking at, it actually disproves what they're trying to say.
Okay, I've got to stop you there because you're wrong. No, they don't have looming. What they assert is looming. Now, looming and sinking are refractive effects. The light changing its direction because it's changing. You can look this up if you look at Snell's law in terms of the application. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of why it does it, but that is an atmospheric effect. They aren't measuring the atmosphere. They're not taking endless measurements every meter between you and the observation. You're not doing that. What they do is apply something called terrestrial refraction and say it's looming. Now, looming, as I say, is an atmospheric effect, and to definitely account for it being looming, you'd have to take a certain amount of measurements and prove that that is actually the case, as opposed to it's only looming because our model says it shouldn't be there. But they don't apply looming being an actual atmospheric effect. They apply terrestrial refraction, 7/6 of the begging the question R value I mentioned earlier in the debunking. So not only do they beg the question that Earth is a sphere, it's called a curve calculator, every outcome is a spherical one, but they also then bend light around the presupposition of a sphere at the rate of 7/6 of the radius value that they've presupposed at step 1. So it's a begging the question fallacy on steroids when you get to them claiming looming, in quotes, because it isn't. They're simply utilising the mathematics of terrestrial refraction, not atmospheric refraction. A begging the question fallacy on steroids, utilising the R value. So no, they don't have looming, in the same way as it would be equally preposterous for us to say, when they ask us, why is it being obscured? Well, sinking. Well, who the hell are we to assert that it's sinking? In reality, it's an angular size reduction that's caused it to disappear from bottom up at the most limited angle, but that's besides the point. We could just do as they do and make a baseless assertion that it's sinking. Well, no, you'd have to back that up with some sort of atmospheric measurements and some proof that that's actually what's occurring, rather than just saying it when applying 7/6R, begging the question fallacy of the R value twice removed.
I think the best thing you said, Nathan, was when it doesn't fit their model, and just fill in the blanks. So Neil deGrasse Tyson, when it doesn't fit the model, says, oh, you got to be 120,000 feet before you could see any curvature. Wait a minute. Your model says the Earth is 25,000 miles in circumference and 8 inches per mile square. We should be able to see it with the naked eye. No. It doesn't fit my model, so I got to go now up 120,000 feet to see it. Okay, what about the 8 inches per mile to your 25,000? No, forget that.
Yes, because he's verifying the horizon. So when he's saying you can't see it, what's it? He's not giving you any clarity, but I know what it is when he's talking about seeing the Earth bending from 120,000 feet. He's talking about the horizon, the claimed and reified edge of the sphere. Well, the horizon isn't the edge of a sphere, but he's saying that you'll see that horizon bending at 120,000 feet. Well, the horizon's not the edge of his reified model. But that's what he means. In reality, from ground level and from the moment you ascend, if we lived on a spherical surface, the ground beneath you would fall away at a greater rate as you ascend. That's just a fact. It doesn't happen because the Earth is flat, and you don't notice any effects of anything falling away from you ever. You do, however, observe perspective, and that's all. Atmospheric conditions will alter your view and shorten the distance you can see. But that's pretty much it.
When I mentioned looming, the point I was trying to make is that they try and claim looming as being something it's not and a proof for their curve. But when you look at what looming really is, it actually just proves that it's flat. It doesn't prove a curve. It proves the opposite. That's why they can never show you looming. They can never show it to you because real looming doesn't prove a curve. It proves flat. If you look at what real looming is. But they try and assert looming and then they go into super looming and whatever other nonsense. But they try and hold on to that. But real looming, if you look at examples of real looming, like for instance, a car driving along a highway and it looks like the car in the distance is floating, but it's not. It's just the road looks like it's after disappearing underneath the car, but it's not. The car is not floating. The road is still there. And the same happens at sea, where it looks like there's a boat floating, but it isn't floating. It is floating, but it looks like it's floating in the air, not on the water. It looks like the water has disappeared underneath. That's what looming is. And it's either that or it's a completely inverted thing where you have like a ship where it's upside down. You can have a ship upside down. So you have like an image in the air, but it's upside down. It's actually in one of Ranty's. Ranty actually captured it brilliantly in one of his observations. I don't know if he knows it or not, but they try and claim looming, but looming is not what they say it is.
Correct.
Well,
looming I just want to I'll just reiterate it one more time. I'm sorry, whoever's talking. They don't have looming. They say looming or super looming or slightly looming or whatever they claim, but looming is an actual atmospheric effect. They're not going to be applying actual atmospheric effects. They're applying very specifically terrestrial refraction. Now, they might change the numbers and then decide that they're going to arbitrarily assign the change of the number to super looming or slightly looming. But it doesn't mean that what they're actually applying, albeit a description of something that does occur in the atmosphere, is what they apply. They apply terrestrial refraction. So as soon as they say looming, no, that's an atmospheric effect. That's not been accounted for. You've not gone out and taken measurements of this atmosphere and proven that it is actually the thing you say. And the reason you can make that assertion is because when they claim looming, they're not showing what Ranty Flat Earth shows. He's showing distorted, crazy effects that are being messed up by the atmosphere. And, like you say, floating cars, floating boats in the middle of the air when the ocean's a couple of inches below them in the shot. Well, obviously, that's not what's occurring in reality. It's a very distorted view of the world. But when they say looming, you've got a perfectly normal picture. You've got a picture of the Chicago skyline with details. And they'll say, oh, yeah, that's looming. Well, no, it's not a distorted image of the world. And when you say looming, you mean I'm projecting that up from behind the Earth that's been reified as a sphere, from behind the reified horizon called my Earth curve, at a rate of light bending around that presupposition of the Earth bending, to bring it back into view in perfect symmetry, without any distorted effects at all. And suddenly that's looming. Oh, no, that isn't. You've got to prove it's actually doing the atmospheric effect. But they don't. They apply 7/6R. That's the point. R being the assumption of Earth being a sphere, the very thing they're trying to prove.
It's super mega looming, or the ultra super mega looming.
Yeah, a slightly different mathematical value than 7/6R, but it will absolutely be utilising that R value, presupposing Earth is a sphere and presupposing light is bending around that sphere at the rate of the sphere.
A clock
I listened
at
to... Go on, sorry, Matt.
a clock at 20 miles. I just see a clock at 20 miles.
Well, we got 5 ballers in here. Maybe you have a different opinion.
I listened to Rumpus a few weeks ago. You know this thing he was going to come out with, his big presentation on looming? He was going on since, I think, about the 300th episode or something of the Flat Earth debates. This thing, he's always had 99% done.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. I heard him speaking about that there recently. I think it was a few weeks ago on Jose's. I don't listen to Jose's now, but it was a few weeks ago on Jose's, I think it was. And he was basically saying, this is basically what he said. I can't remember the episode, so I can't refer you to it. That it'll always look flat, but that's only because it's curved, because it's always looming. He has 800 pages done. This is what he has 800 pages of thing on.
I want to reiterate that. Very good point. That's correct. So occasionally people, when with the clock example, will say, no, it's only the bottom being obscured and the rest of it's visible. Incorrect. Standard refraction is the alternative name for terrestrial refraction. Standard, meaning that when we figured this out with Chris Monk, everything in their model is all looming, always. So nothing is where it's supposed to be. It's all got slightly different effects of 7/6R, bringing it back from slightly different distances, with slightly more, obviously, if it's further, 7/6R being applied to it. So nothing in their model is where it's supposed to be. It's all looming. Now, when that penny dropped, I'm sure Anthony will back me on this, he was there. It was a bit of a revelation, because we're trying to match it up and compare actual straight lines, i.e. here's your point of view, here's your target, draw a straight line between the two and measure where it's supposed to be. And what we're doing when we're having to compare it to their model is rearrange everything in the model to match up with standard refraction. And at one point Chris Monk said it in those words, no, nothing on their model's where it's supposed to be. It's all looming. So yeah, absolutely correct, Brian. That's used for him as a defense. For me, it was a revelation that their model is all holograms. Everything.
Yeah.
Right. We're supposed to live on a globe that looks like a perfectly flat plane.
Yeah.
And that is the norm. That is
all they do. I remember when me and Nathan were not arguing, discussing the merits of how they're just going to add more refraction. And Nathan described it as, don't worry about how they mathematically represent it. It's just sliding the bullshit scale up. Don't look at it as a mathematical representation. Just look at it as add more bullshit to the bullshit they've already presented. And that's what it is. They're just adding more bullshit to the bullshit because it's more and more refraction each time.
It's more and more refraction. Well, no, more and more terrestrial refraction. But yes, more accurately, getting excited, more and more R. We just need a bit more R to make this a bit more flat. So we need to flatten it back out again with terrestrial refraction. In other words, bring it back into your line of view because have the whole thing bent round the curve. Well, when it's too far bent round the curve, i.e. you can't see it or you can see it too much or too little, you can just slide that bullshit of how much R you're going to add. It's 7/6R you're adding when you move your bullshit slider of how much refraction. No, not refraction. How much 7/6R, more than or less than, are you applying? So in other words, we just need a bit more R.
Yeah.
On I think it could have been the same show I was listening to a few weeks ago, Jose's show. Ranty came on because his name was mentioned by Miles Davis. Miles Davis was saying about how he had debunked Ranty's 1 foot observation. Now, right, this is what he was saying. But then Ranty came on and Miles Davis didn't stay. I have to go. He didn't stay on too long. But he was trying to argue with Ranty. And I looked at Ranty's 1 foot observation, the video, and he sent me stills of it. and it's going into a presentation I have on the way up. And there's 1 foot off the water. He's seen buildings 18 miles away, and before he hits the buildings at 13 miles, there is a 35 foot high sand dune. And I don't know, I can't remember what Miles Davis was saying. There's some nonsense how he debunked it or whatever. But they were all dismissing this. And Ranty came in and Ranty kept calm, but Ranty eventually had to go off and have a cigarette or something like that because they were really stressing him out. And I looked at the thing, and there's actually a mirage. I think it could be what they call one of the versions of looming, right? Of actual looming that's going on in his 1 foot observation. And it's actually an inversion of the buildings of Barrow Town Hall and them. It's actually an inversion of them above that. There's a whole inversion above that happening. So how could a mirage, which is what they have to make that be, how could a loomed up mirage create another mirage?
Perfect. Well said. Let me answer you. It can't.
Yeah.
And we had, I believe he was a physics student or a graduate. He might have been called Phil. This is going back nearly 1,000 shows. But Anthony put precisely that question to him. The guy came on, he'd modelled it out, and Anthony asked him, this was actually not with Ranties, it was with the Isle of Man. But Anthony asked him, how is it that you have an inferior mirage running the length of the picture? How would the island be capable of being loomed up, an atmospheric effect, but the increased distance of the south end of the island being loomed up with an identical mirage running the length of the photograph? How is that even possible? Because essentially it's saying that the mirage itself is loomed up. Completely insane. But that's essentially what we reached in the point where they're still modelling it. This is before we figured out that they're just begging the question anyway. But we're arguing within the fallacy. And Anthony's like, well, how are you going to model that? How do you model a mirage at the bottom of the land coming around the curve at greater and greater and greater distances? So it's essentially miraging up a mirage from further and further beyond the curve in perfect symmetry along the length of the picture. You know, obviously it's bloody optical effect. You know, that's the point of, that's the diffraction limit. Perfectly along the horizon, obviously. But to them, no, we just can't justify, we can't explain or model how a mirage is being miraged up. Because it's preposterous. But you're right.
Remember what his answer?
His answer was, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't model that. No, you can't, because it's not reality.
Wasn't that Phil?
I thought his guy was called Phil. He was definitely a very educated, academically at least, man.
I think he was doing a master's in physics at the time.
Something like that. My memory's not that terrible, but I vaguely remember him being called Phil. I vaguely remember him being a very nice chap and very honest, and showing us his model that he'd worked extremely hard on for several months. And it boiled down to that question from Sleeping Warrior. How is it that you've got a mirage miraging up? How are you going to model that? And he said, yeah, that did trouble me. I can't.
Can I read something, Nathan, that relates? I'm on the astronomy podcast site, and the guy puts down in script what he was saying on the live show as a possible reason for geocentrism is that it was easy and it fit the basic observations and everyday experience. First off, as I sit here at my desk recording this episode, it does not feel as though I am moving at all. It seems like I'm stationary. And yet when I look outside, I can easily tell that the sun has moved over the last hour. And at night, I can clearly tell the stars also move over the course of an hour or so. These two very basic observations would lead anyone who doesn't have any other information and who's assuming the most simple explanation to think the Earth is stationary and the rest of the universe revolves around it. The obvious is there, but he's got to go make it fit his model. So it can't be the obvious, simple explanation.
Yeah, so it's our version of saying clock at 20 miles and them saying, no, standard refraction, super looming, blah, blah, blah. But I find it interesting that they can think at that level of complexity to explain their bullshit narrative. and they reject the more simpler obviousness of our explanation, which is it's just there. But when it comes to us explaining something relatively complex, like a 2 or 3 stage explanation, like, for example, but not limited to, relative density, where you've got 2 objects of different densities or similar but different densities, and we can manipulate the density of the medium to make the object move without applying gravity or de-applying gravity or any of that nonsense, the cause being the manipulation of the gradient that the thing's in, the medium that the thing's in. They can't get their head around that complex level of explanation by us. It's not that difficult, but they don't seem to manage to understand it. But they all seem to understand the intricacies and the nuances to do with superlumin and towering and all this refractive nonsense that nobody understands. Let's be honest, all these grey, curvy and bendy lines that are all makes no sense on a globe at all, because you're behind the curve. But they seem to understand it when it's in their favor. They play dumb when it's against them.
That's why it could never fit the scientific method, because they have to make everything up to fit their made-up model. So they go to the bending of space-time. Well, how in the world are you ever going to prove that?
Yeah, in their world, science doesn't prove anything, because the science they follow it's not possible to prove any of it. You know, it's all overcomplicated nonsense, there's no way of proving it. It's, you know,
Brian, that reminds me of the rumpus. You know who the rumpus is, Brian?
Yeah.
There was a time when his favorite phrase was the whole body of science. So when you'd ask him a question, the general answer that you'd get back would be the whole body of science, Nathan. And we used to take the mick out of him, because the whole body of science, there isn't a whole body of science. But he used this phrase to describe the confidence that he had in his answers that they were true. So me and Nathan used to mock him all the time because there is no actual body of science and he's citing it. But when you're describing it like that, it reminds me of the rumpus when he'd cite this fiction that is the whole body of science, and when you actually scratch below the surface, there isn't any science for their model. It's all about the window.
Yeah, it's nonsense. Consensus. It's only consensus. Sorry, can't manage. Just consensus. Go on, sorry.
Yeah,
no, exactly. When you ask them for the hypothesis, hang on, let me look for it. Well, it's consensus. Consensus is not a hypothesis.
Yeah, if you go into a rhetoric hangout, right, there'll be like 3 or 4 of them in the background, and you believe that you're dealing with just one dude, right, who's very intelligent, whoever it might be Sean, Reds, whoever, but they've got 5 or 6 people that are ready to jump on anything that you say and then find counter arguments to it, so that it looks like the guy that you're talking against is very intelligent, but in real world he's got cronies behind the scene working so that all he's got to do is create a little bit of delay, and then he can come back on topic. But when you realize that really the common MO in like the likes of Jose's chats is where they'll get 3 or 4 people and they'll all say that blue is actually red. And if 3 or 4 people say that blue is actually red, and in our case it would be that's not, we would say that's a container, you've got gas pressure in it, and they say no, that's not a container, it's not sealed at the top. If 4 people on their side say yeah, that's not a container, the audience somehow seem to accept that that's not a container, and we've been debunked. And because there's 4 of them that are saying it, not because it's true, but because there's 4 saying it, and that's what we're up against.
Exactly. I found out when I went into Jose's, when I did go in there a few times, I instantly started getting, I got kind of irate, because it was a case of, it was consensus. They were fighting consensus, and when things started going against them, when you had arguments that they didn't like or they couldn't deal with on the spot, the whole thing was to try and stop you, slow you down, get in your way, change the subject, and then if all came to all, Jose helped them. You know, that kind of way. And if I'm kind of like, if I'm debating, I'm like kind of be jumping on everything that they say that might be wrong, and then Jose would be turning on me for that, saying, "Oh, you're not leaving them speak." But if they're just going, leaving them speak means you have to sit there and listen to a lot of monologue. And after 5 minutes of monologue, it's like watching like a soap on TV, like, or something. It's just like, I'm bored after 5 minutes of listening to it. You kind of, it takes the wind out of you listening to all that monologue, and that's all it is monologue. It's not going to win. It's not doing anything.
Yeah, they're just trying to distract you and take you off guard. They do it all the time, though. And the audience are happy to sit there and accept it as an acceptable tactic. And we're like, hang on, let's stay on topic and let's answer the question. How do you have gas pressure without a container? No. Let's talk about something else while we forget about the point that's been made and we argue about something else that's within the question. Like Highlander does it all the time. If you ask Highlander, how do you have gas pressure without a container? He'll come back with, yeah, mom's a slag or something stupid like that. And we're like, come on, answer the question. But the problem is they can't answer the question. And we all know why.
When have I ever said your mum was a slag? Huh?
Yeah, that is what you do, though, isn't it? You can't answer.
Just 4 or 5 other ballers in here.
Guys in
Come
the
on.
hangout, can you put
Shut up,
yourselves on
Highlander.
mute if you're not talking? If you're talking in the conversation, mute between conversations. All I can hear is click, click, click. Same goes for you in Discord.
He just said that if he asks me that question, I come back with your mum's a slag. When have I ever said that to him?
You said that a couple of days ago. I've asked you over and over again. How do you have gas pressure without a container?
Right. So when did I ever reply with your mum's a slag? When did I ever say that?
To the effect of, you said something about my mum, and I was like, answer the question. Do you not remember? Do you really want me to go back and find it and
said something about my mum? Yeah. After I was muted, you were the one that said.
I never mentioned your mum. I never mentioned people's mothers. Answer. See, look, you're doing it right now. Answer the. I'm not asking about the insult.
Again.
I'm not asked about the insult. I want to know how you have gas pressure without a container.
Answer the question.
I don't care about the question. Yeah? He's the one claiming that I come out with your mum's a fucking hole. Yeah.
How do you have gas pressure without a container?
Let's try it a different way. So, yesterday or the day before yesterday, Highlander, I was detailing something quite complex. It was coincidentally gas pressure without a container. And your rebuttal when describing something complex, second law of thermodynamics, how entropy would apply to open systems like your pipe. Your response was to tell me that there's a vacuum between my ears.
Yeah.
Right. So what's that got to do with calling people's mum a hole? I've never said that.
How do you have gas pressure without a container? How do you have gas pressure without a container?
Broke the silence, John. It was beautiful.
The point here is that if we're talking about whether or not someone slagged off someone else's mom, or whether or not a coffee cup will stay warm, they've got plenty to talk about. But when we ask them about the nature of our reality, and the fact that it's claimed the sky is a vacuum, but entropy would disperse the gas we breathe into that space, there's nothing but silence.
So let's try it again for a third, fourth, fifth time. How do you have gas pressure without a container, Highlander, please?
The only thing
Come
I
on,
can...
gents. You're just going to get silence out of this guy. We got more ballers in here. We got a full Discord. So we got no new ballers that can come in.
I don't mind their answer being the same as Danny Faulkner's.
Well, Nathan, we're back to
Be great to hear it, though.
our conversation before. Please show us a single viable scientific hypothesis for any of your claims.
Well done for everybody that enjoyed the silence then. That pregnant pause was beautiful. I'd rather have an answer off him. I'd like to hear an actual answer off him, even if he says, I don't know. I'd rather have an answer, because he's been asked it for a week now and he's still not answered. He keeps like avoiding the answer. Can we have an answer off you, even if it's I don't know?
Yeah, has anybody ever gotten an intelligent response out of Highlander for anything? Honest question, please.
Yeah, Highlander's a pretty reasonable guy, apart from when it comes to his religious belief about Earth being a sphere. We've had plenty of conversations. He's been on the pre-show. He's a nice guy. I actually quite like him.
Yeah, I've heard him plenty of times, but when somebody asks him a serious question, I don't get anything substantial out of the guy.
That's because his side of the argument doesn't give him a hypothesis to defend his argument. He can't find one either.
Yeah, it's not really his fault he can't back up his belief. You know,
I was just about to
what
say
can
the
he
same
do?
thing. We're of like mind, Brian. I was going to say the same thing. That's not really his fault, is it? That's just his religion. Blame the religion, not the man.
No, blame the man.
Right. Well, he's sitting here like a bump on a log, right? There's only 17 places in this Discord. So it's for people who are supposed to be taking part in the debate. There's always messages in the chat about that.
Are you a mod, Travis? Kick him out. Feel free.
No, I'm not a mod. No. I'm just a loyal fan, sir.
I just like pointing out that Highlander doesn't like, for some reason, he takes an aversion to that question and would rather add hom instead. I just want the audience to be aware that that seems to be an acceptable process for a Highlander, and I don't understand why. At least say, I don't know if you don't know the answer.
People add hom because they don't have a viable hypothesis to defend the point they're making. They have to add hom.
Well, it's the same thing with Akuma virus, aka the blind sniper. This guy just comes in here every day and sits in here and doesn't say a damn thing. It's bullshit, dude. Come off mute, Akuma.
I like it.
The
tables have turned to the Silent Globers getting hostility from the Flat Earthers for not arguing their bullshit. Oh my, how times have changed. Go and check out like any number below 50 of the debates and see how how this is the total antithesis of how it started. Great.
Just think back to the days when we had to like be nice to these guys because we didn't know all the angles, and now it's like they just can't even come in. They won't come in. They claim protest, right? But the reality is they realize that they can't come in and preach their nonsense because we know how to stop it now, and they have to pretend that they're on protest because, well, they can't come in and beat us with any science. They can't prove what the cause of sunrise and sunset is. They tell us it's the Earth tipping backwards, but we all know that the Earth's not tipping backwards to cause the sunrise and sunset. The sun's going down. We're not tipping backwards. But they tell people that, and they want to come in and preach their churchhood to anybody that's happy to listen, and they can't do it here. Why do you think Jose's chat exists?
So
I have to say.
Go on,
sorry.
Brian. No, go ahead.
I just say about Highlander. At the end of the day, Highlander, I listen to the show all the time. I'm not always on the panel, but I listen to the show all the time. And Highlander is nearly always in there. This is the hardest station for someone who is a baller. There's nowhere in the world that someone who is a baller could be that would be more difficult to defend your ball than in this show. But Highlander is there. All these other people, Danny Faulkner, all these other Big Blue, all these Blue Marvel Science, all these people, they're not in there. They don't come in. They don't ever come in. They're too busy looking after their egos and their nonsense. Highlander, at least he's in there trying.
Actually,
it's almost as if they got like two.
Hold on one second, Sleeping Warrior. Go ahead. I think that was Babs. Not Babs. Was it Babs?
It's Babs. I'm in here with a stock account, but it's showing up as Babs on your main page. But yeah, what I was going to say is that what a lot of these ballers do, what I've noticed is that they have like roundtable meetings on a regular basis where they discuss different tactics that they can use to combat some of the arguments that we come up with. And I've also noticed that a lot of flat earthers try and debate these people. And not to be offensive, but a lot of flat earthers aren't really that knowledgeable in like math or physics. And regular people aren't, because it's not really like a requirement if you're looking for employment. But these guys, the Globers that we're dealing with, are experts in math and physics. So they always look for easy targets that they can take apart. And
hold on one second, Sleeping Warrior.
Go ahead, repeat that again?
You're nearly done. Go ahead.
Yeah, so they always look for easy targets that they can pummel with math and physics. And I recently saw this video of this guy that had a debate with conspiracy cats, and now he's turned into a Glober just because he wasn't able to win that debate. And what I'd suggest to most flat earthers is you shouldn't be debating with these people or going into debates if you don't know what their strategies are. Their strategies are they're always going to use a straw man against you. And if you can't provide that, they're going to force you to provide a straw man that they can attack. That's why they're always asking you for a model of flat Earth, or if you don't have one, they're going to default back to the AE map just because they need a straw man to attack. And they've been practicing strategies in regards to like these different models that were implemented in the past, and they've mastered rebuttals to make against people that are going to try and debate them about, you know, those specific models. So the reason they don't come here is because they can't answer any of the housekeeping questions, and they hate being asked about the housekeeping questions just because they know that, you know, this is where the cutting edge like arguments happen. Like this is where like the most intelligent flat earthers are. So they're never going to come here. They're only going to look for easy targets. They're only going to look for people they can humiliate and make look ridiculous.
Let me just pick you up on something you said.
Go ahead, Stephen Moore.
You said a lot of flat earthers don't tend to know about physics or maths. And you said it as though, I know you didn't mean it the way that I'm going to say it, but you said it as though it was an unacceptable position. I'm going to remind people that you don't need to know about physics or maths to know what's going on here. You need to know scientific method because you need to know what the cause and effect relationship is. The physics, yeah, it helps if you understand some of the physics, but you don't need to know the physics. All you've got to say is what's causing that, and then basically make them prove it. So one of the key questions is what causes sunrise, what causes sunset on their model, and they say it's Earth turn. Well, that Earth turn is what they've got to demonstrate is causing sunrise and sunset. Well, we know the rise and the cause of sunrise and sunset isn't Earth turn. That doesn't mean we need to know what it is. But what we point out is that they can't prove that the Earth's turning or tipping backwards to prove that the sunrise is caused by Earth tipping backwards. Because if they can't prove it, then who cares what's causing it? So it's not really, for me, it's not really about the physics or the maths. What it is about is, can you prove the claims that you make, which is the heliocentric model? Can you prove that we're moving? Can you prove that we're tipping backwards? Can you prove that we're orbiting anything? Can you prove that we've got a molten iron core? It's the housekeeping questions. Can they prove the claims that they make? It's not, if you know scientific method, you can pull apart all of their arguments. But what they do is they say 6 of you, if there's 5 or 6 of them, and they all say, nah, that's not the answer, and they ridicule it, that's gaslighting. You will think that you've got it wrong, or that you didn't quite have the right citation, or you misspoke, or whatever. But actually, you don't realize that you've actually got the strongest argument.
Correct.
But they're telling you that it's a weak argument, and you accept it because you're not in the majority rule. It's 6 against 1. And that's why you just got to realize that we're being gaslit all the time.
I just want to just a couple of things.
They could always fall back.
I'll let you respond, Babs. I'm really sorry. There's just 3 things that are piling up now. So number 1, I want QE, when he's got the inclination to do so, to hopefully point out in support of what Babs has said about lumberjacks and chainsaws. I'm sure he'll know what I'm talking about. So that's the first thing. The second thing, Anthony, we were going to discuss something on the pre-show in terms of a concession you got in terms of needing a container. I don't want that to slip by before the end of the show. Hello, Ranty Flat Earth. And I also want to shout out some super chats. But I don't want Babs to not get an opportunity to respond. So, Babs, go ahead. I'm sorry I cut you off.
It's no problem. I was just going to tell Anthony that they could always fall back on telling you that you don't understand physics and math. You could say that you don't need it to make your argument, but they're going to use that as the basis of why you're not understanding the information that they're presenting you with, just because you don't have a basic understanding of math or physics.
Yeah, I understand that. I've had that all the time. Rumpus says that all the time, and I just laugh when he says it now because it's a non sequitur argument. We're asking for the cause of sunrise and sunset, and they come up with maths. Well, maths isn't the cause of sunrise and sunset. We want to see what's causing it. And obviously, we can't manipulate Earth turn. So once you realize that all of the claims that they tell us, none of them they can prove in scientific method, then they haven't got any science behind them. They've just got stories, maths, models, whatever it is. But I mean, let's be honest, it's not difficult to calculate something that you see and explain it with numbers. And that's what Einstein's done with gravity. We see something, we believe there's a force there. He calculates it using mathematics to demonstrate it, but isn't demonstrating cause and effect. He's not demonstrating that there's a force there or that there's bendy space-time there. He's just calculating it. Well, I don't need to be a mathematician to know that that's not proof. So just be cautious when they rely heavily on maths and criticize you for not understanding maths, or because we want to see the proof. And proof's not found in maths. Proof's found in science, and that involves manipulating the independent variable. They hate that. The independent variable kills their model over and over and over again.
Right, I'm going to do some shout-outs. So shout-out to Isam Halsky, who says, FE is the Donald Trump of cosmology, and 600 miles are navigated as flat. Sup, Nathan? Yeah, what's up, Issa? Good to see you. Thanks for the super chat. Rolly and crew. I think that means you. Shout out also to Julio Pabon, who says, destroy the globe, keep it up, guys. He also says, in a separate super chat, so thank you very much for both the super chats, Julio Pabon, Elon Musk presented Tesla's new pickup truck. After showing it off a bit, he tells the audience, quote, this is the actual truck. It's not CGI, end quote. Interesting, don't you think? Thank you very much indeed for the super chat and your remarks, Julio. Very, very interesting indeed. Also, shout out to John Blatch, who just sends me money. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate the support. And last but by no means least, Dave Rakia Gafford. Cricket and pass. Love it. Answer to all the tough Q's. Rakia life. Thank you very much indeed all for all of your super chats. Thank you very much indeed for your support. So, QE. There's a danger, as pointed out by Babs, that people will come here, which is why I've labelled today's show Earth Curvature, as we spent the first half an hour of the show, maybe a little bit less, discussing amongst ourselves the housekeeping question that is any signs of Earth curvature. My intention being tomorrow's show will also do the same, but with axial rotation, and hopefully we'll spend the first half of the show discussing it, or the first quarter of the show, whatever. Anyway, in light of that, I just want to point out that we will eventually do some short 10-minute shows that are condensed versions of these discussions and more concise. But secondly, re-stress what Bab said about people going out there when they don't necessarily have all the angles covered. And this is physics. I hate to piss on your bonfires. We're talking about the physical. Maybe arguable when you talked about the sun, but nevertheless, until that point, we are talking physics here. This establishment of cause and effect in physical reality, the physical and natural world, this is physics. Anyway, QE, can you give your words of warning to anybody who might be in the position that debater a few weeks ago was in when he said he was going to debate an astrophysicist and we said don't, basically?
Thank you for pointing out that physics at its base is the scientific method. Thank you for that. Second, you got the champion of science, the retard Rumpus, who says the second law of thermodynamics doesn't apply to the Earth. But why are you even talking to him anymore? Air is not the atmosphere. Why do you even entertain him? Number three, you're correct. And I warned about this long time ago, that the problem with the flat Earth is flat earthers, right? Most of the flat earthers don't know what they're doing. They haven't done their homework. They come out here probably with good intent, but the intent backfires when they come up against retards. They can't even defeat retard arguments. So they need to sit back. They need to listen. They need to do their homework. It's just as simple as that. If you haven't done your homework, then don't come out here. Don't open up your mouth, because every time you do, you're representing other flat earthers, right? That's all.
So just to offer a little bit of empathy to our friend Highlander, my position at the start of these debates was his position now later on in these debates. I.e., I didn't have very many answers, so I would sit not answering in stony silence when asked a troubling question, rather than humiliating myself with an incorrect answer. So if you ignore slips of the tongue in terms of mathematical foibles I've made, or claim to be proofs of globe taken by globe protagonists during debates about lighthouses, if you exclude these very reaching claim to be globe proofs, there's very little that you can actually put your fingers on, because like Highlander, and Dr. Daniel Faulkner, sometimes the best thing to say is nothing. And that's a very wise position to take in most instances. Now, unfortunately for Danny Faulkner, his pride got the better of him, and he posted a citation that was hillbilly blue balls gas pressure without a container, in reality a transfer of pressure from one container to another. Highly embarrassing if you're a PhD priest in the subject. Pride.
Can I just also point out though that if you're brave enough to go onto the debate scene and or even just have conversations with people, some of the best arguments have come from a fall first. I mean, I don't get everything right. I make mistakes. Everyone knows I make mistakes. We all make mistakes because in the heat of the moment, when you're making a video or when you've got someone and you think they're on the rocks, and then we make mistakes, right? Notice the difference between when we make a mistake once compared to them completely lying continuously over and over and over again. We make one mistake, right, and it gets remembered forever. All of their mistakes get completely forgotten about, conveniently, always, by everybody. But if you misspeak once or you get one sum wrong or whatever, that gets tagged on you for the rest of your time here, and they use that against you as some kind of, you're a retard because you couldn't do 2 + 2. Yet they do everything wrong themselves, and everyone completely forgets about it. So don't forget about the fact that we can only make 1 or 2 mistakes before we end up having to make a massive uphill battle, right? But they make mistakes over and over and over again. Look at Rumpus; he makes more mistakes than anybody, but he somehow nobody ever challenges him on it. Look at Hillbilly Blue Balls; none of the ballers are challenging him why this gas pressure without a container video is still up. He's got a big, massive container in it. They're all turning a blind eye, and it's like you're not dealing with honest people. You're dealing with completely dishonest people. But you slip up once, and that'll be your cards marked for a good 6 days. Well, they remember it, and if it keeps coming up and up and up and up and up, you're gonna have to put up with it. But they can make as many mistakes as they want, and they can lie to your teeth, and they can distract with obfuscation tactics about how your mum's a whore and this, that, and the other. And it's all forgotten about on their side because it's a completely uneven keel. But you can't make any mistakes on your side. So just
the ballers are incapable of doing anything wrong. Like when George tried to get Brian fired, nobody chastised him for that on the baller side. When Greater Sapien stole people's money and never went on that trip, nobody said anything. So they can pretty much do anything they want.
Yeah. But if you do anything, that even if you haven't done it, they'll just make up the bits for yourself. I mean, look at me, right? My dog's ill as heck at the minute, and I'm trying to do anything
because we haven't got we're limited for time on this live show, and I want you to talk about the concession you got in terms of containment.
Okay. So I had a conversation with some ballers on this new Facebook group that I've joined, right? It's a private group, and I don't know how he even got in there, but Danny Faulkner's in there. So I wanted to go in and just basically challenge him on his words. But I got a baller he said to me, he says, all right, he says, we'll admit that you need a container for gas pressure if you can explain the gradient. And I'm like, I can explain the gradient, but I don't need to because we need to have the gas pressure dealing with before we start discussing the gradients. He said, no, but we're prepared to concede that. But you need to explain how there is a gradient. And I said, okay. I said, that seems reasonable. I said, I'll give you the answers. We've got numerous cycles that the sun causes, the gas cycles. So it's the hydrological cycle. We've got the nitrogen cycle. We've got a few cycles. You can go to Wikipedia and look them up. There's about 9. I said, and that's the explanation. We're in a dynamic system where gases are all created at ground level and they're listed. There's loads of them. And they said, have you actually looked at this? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, what are you getting at? You're talking as though there's a gotcha here. What are you getting at? And he says, well, just quantify it in terms of like, does it account for the constitution of the atmosphere? So I goes away and I has a little look and I realize there's a bit of an issue on both sides here because I found some information that doesn't work on either model. So I rings a couple of friends to ask them what's their opinion on this and do they have any views on this, because this is a problem for both models. And the first one was Dr. John D, because I know what he does for a living and I know he's he's an intelligent guy. And I said, John, I said, this is the position. I said, I've come across this challenge and I'm looking into it. And it appears that there's a bit of a problem for both models. I said, what do you know about it? And he burst out laughing. And he said, listen, he said, that is one of the key fundamental problems in the whole model thing of this heliocentrism evolution argument thing. He said, this is a big problem. And there is no answer to this particular problem. So I rings Quantum Eraser and I says, John, what's the situation with this? I said, it seems that this might be an issue. And John goes, yeah, that's not the biggest issue. He said, there's a bigger one than that. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then he comes back with a question that I'd never even thought about asking in all the time I've been in Flat Earth. And it dawns on me that this is probably the biggest question. So I don't really know where Nathan wants to lead this, and I'm going to invite Nathan to pick the reins up and lead it where he wants it to go, because I don't know where he wants me to take this and how much he wants me to say. But Nathan, do you want to take over?
Well, I was going to see where it went because QE's here now, and based on the fact that Quantum Eraser's on the panel, he might just want to re-stress his question or reiterate the bigger problem. Fortunately, we've got enough time to do that. So,
okay, so
or not.
The question
he might not.
Are you talking about me or John?
Quantum Eraser, you've detailed a question that left you with a ponderance, but the ponderance was based on the question Quantum Eraser asked, and you're asking me if I want to take this further than it's at. Well, the bit I want to get on this show, so you know what I'm trying to achieve, is the fact that at some point there's a concession made in regards to gas pressure without a container. Now, Anthony also asked my opinion, and the subsequent questions in regards to mould and its production of nitrogen or whatever. I was like, this is all inconsequential. At some point, Quantum Eraser was reluctant, nay defiant, when it came to the answer of how we have a gas pressure gradient, delta X, because the focus is on how we have a gas pressure in the first place if the sky is a vacuum. Upon concession of a container, you've won. Who gives a crap? That puts hold on. That puts them in the same boat as me. Oh, so you've got some questions now, have you? Well, isn't that nice? Me too. Well, that means you're on my side now. Not just going to sit here and demand that I give you bloody answers to questions you've now got, because I've got them too. And why have I got them? Well, because the sky's not a vacuum. You appreciate that we need a container to have gas pressure. So we have gas pressure, and therefore we've got a container. The sky is not a vacuum. Do you think I give two shits that you don't understand where nitrogen comes from? Like I care! We've been lied to on a monumental scale. So you appreciate that now, do you, Fundy, who's asking me where nitrogen comes from in the proportions you've detailed? Because that's now troubling. Oh, well, I don't care. Sky's not a vacuum.
Because the audience are not going to know what we're referring to, right? The issue is to do with the constitution of the atmosphere. We can explain where the oxygen comes from. It comes from the hydrological cycle. We can explain where some of the nitrogen comes from. It comes from the nitrogen cycle. But the quantity of oxygen coming from the surface water evaporation of the hydrological cycle is disproportionately small, huge relative to the amount of nitrogen that's created of the bacteria in the nitrogen cycle. Given that nitrogen is 70% of the atmosphere and oxygen's like 30%, yeah, you can account for the 30% of the oxygen, but where's the nitrogen from? And I didn't know. So I started to look into it, and they say it comes from like comet. They say, well, I don't know where the nitrogen comes from, but I started asking questions for where the nitrogen came from, and there is no answer. So if they don't know where the nitrogens come from, we need an explanation, just out of curiosity's sake. So when I asked John said to me, he said, that's not the biggest question. And I was like, well, what's bigger than the nitrogen and the oxygen in the atmosphere?
Wait, do you want to ask that question, Quantum Eraser?
Say again.
Do you want to ask the question that preceded this discussion?
What question?
You said there's a bigger problem, not where the extra nitrogen comes from, but where a different material, substance came from. I can't hint any more than that without giving it away. I'm just asking you if you want to actually ask this rather important question, or do you want me to round out the live show?
I didn't ask a question. The subject was brought up to me. I snickered because my first response was, it's over. Once they concede that you need a container for gas pressure, it's over. The rest is barely, palpable background noise. I started laughing to myself. And then the second one, yeah. What? Say again? Somebody was interrupting?
No, it's feedback.
Just an audio issue. Go ahead.
Audio issues, for crying out loud. Like I said, it's over, right? As soon as you concede that you need a container for gas pressure, like we all know, like every incoherent second grader knows, it's over. Once you ask the question about gas pressure gradients, I already gave you the answer to those. It's all the cycles. Anthony said there were 9. Yeah, somewhere in that vicinity, right? Now, if you want to get down into the weeds, then the question is, where did the initial conditions or concentrations come first? right? The initial conditions and the concentrations were set by the creator.
Yeah, that's not the point I was going to. Let me just interrupt. The question you came back with was, where did the oceans come from in the first place? Now, I'd never even considered it because it was just a given that they were just like, for me, it was like there must be an explanation by science. But try and find out, if you're a flat earther, right? Have a research around and see what you can find. Where did the nitrogen? Where did the nitrogen in the atmosphere come from? Given that it's 70% of the atmosphere, right? And then when you've considered that, when you've worked out that there is no explanation in science, then look at the question, well, where did the oceans come from? And you'll realize again that there is no explanation in science. They don't know where it come from, but they say that they believe that the oceans came from satellites and comets and meteorites and all, not satellites, comets and meteorites. Now, if space is a fake medium and you can't have gas pressure next to the vacuum of space without some kind of container. If space doesn't really exist, but they tell us that the oceans were formed by comets and meteorites and all this over the years, then that can't be true. So if space is fake and comets and meteorites are not true, then what's the explanation for where the bloody oceans have come from?
The answer to that question is they don't have one, because all of their rhetoric is based around a sky vacuum, and without the container there can be no pressure. With that, I'm going to say, if you're watching this on the Nathan Oakley premiering stream, then stay tuned, as there will be an after show to follow. Unfortunately, if you're watching this live on the Nathan Oakley 1980 stream, then this is where we bid you farewell. A huge, massive, enormous thank you to all of today's Discord and G+ panel for making the live show possible. And of course, a massive thank you to all of you for smashing the super chat, liking, commenting, sharing, subscribing, and all that good stuff. As I say, stay tuned if you're watching on the premiering stream, and I'll see you all in the next video.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!